Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the fifth in this week's virtual conference, InvestTech. Thanks very much for joining us. We've had some really interesting sessions over the last 4 days, and I know that today is really, for me, going to be one of the highlights of this week. I've seen the slides and it's a rip snorter. So firstly, let me introduce Fraser Jack, our host for the week, and thanks very much, Fraser, for the efforts you've put into helping us organise this week's InvestTech conference.
Toby, thank you for having me along. Thank you for using the word rip snorter to describe a presentation. I think that's a terrific way to describe it. We're really excited about what's coming up today, and of course, and been very excited about what we've produced over the week in the way of great content. Yes,
and of course, over the week we've been here because of the support from our sponsors, and we thank them. Before I hand over to Fraser to introduce Dr. Michael Kollo, just a quick reminder of a couple of the things that we have coming up over the next 6 months. Next month, our Portfolio Management Conference in Melbourne on the 7th, Sydney on the 14th, and Brisbane on the 21st. I mean, these are tricky, difficult times in markets. And that's just for the Fed, let alone for individual investors. We're going to be addressing some of the considerations, both geopolitical, high-level economic issues, and then translating that down into what that means at an asset class level in the Portfolio Management Conference. I encourage you to come along and take part in that. And then in May, we'll be doing our kind of early mid-year review. How's it gone so far? What's the outlook look like for the rest of the year? And that'll be hosted by Robert Talevsky from Activus, a leading Melbourne-based portfolio management business. So over to today, and Fraser.
Toby, you want to quickly go back a slide? Do you want to just remind people how they can get along or get tickets to the Portfolio Management Conference?
Sure. Yes. Thanks, Fraser. Yes. Of course, through the IMAP website, we'll be you can register for that. We will actually be sending complimentary tickets to everybody who has taken part in this week's sessions. That's, I think, been about 500 people have participated so far in the 4 days to date, and I know we've already attracted a significant audience today. So through the IMAP website, or look for the invitation in your inbox.
Yes,
Fraser.
Thank you, Toby. Yeah, look, I'm super excited to introduce Dr. Michael Kollo to you today. I've heard him speak on a number of occasions, and every single time I've leant in and taken copious amounts of notes, whether he's talking about quant or AI or all these sorts of things that really I love listening to him, and I really enjoy nerding out on the sessions he's provided. So I'm really excited to talk about today's session or introduce today's session. But before we do that, I want to quickly just mention the fact that if you do have questions throughout, there's going to be times for questions at the end. So please put your questions in the Q&A chat, in the Q&A box, as you see there. And we will endeavour to get to those questions, ask Dr. Michael Kollo those questions at the end. Just a reminder, this session is being recorded, of course, and of course, so are the other sessions throughout the week. And if you want to go back and watch any of those sessions, you can find them on the IMAP website. Just a reminder that there's CPD available for today's session if you're live on the call. And so those certificates will be sent out to you afterwards. Dr. Michael Kollo, welcome to the conversation. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, glad to be here. Thanks very much for the invite.
Fantastic to have you along. Now, if you want to start sharing your screen and blow away our slides, I'm sure there was a lot. As Toby mentioned, you've got a lot of great slides and a great story. But what I really like is that it's not just high level. You really get into some practical case study type stuff with us today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm really looking forward to it, and it's a whole new world.
Yep, it is. It's the beginning of a new world. So I'll let you take it away. I won't steal any more of your time.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks everybody, and thanks very much for joining. This is the last session, so I've heard we've had some phenomenal speakers along the way. And really, I think my task here was to present something around the future, a little bit more future looking. It turns out that this technology that I'm going to be talking about today is a lot more here now, and it's probably spreading like wildfire at some of the fastest rates that you've seen any kind of technology spread through industry. So even though we might be talking about the future and future applications for your businesses and what you want to do, actually, what I'm going to tell you, everything here is here today and it's usable today. And I couldn't have said that 3 months ago. So things are moving extremely rapidly in this particular world. And the world that we're going to be talking about today is language models and language tools within AI adoption. So let's get into it. First of all, for those of you that are unfamiliar, ChatGPT is the name of an algorithm that was released by a company called OpenAI for testing, essentially last year, October, November time. And it's just a very sophisticated language algorithm. So what do I mean by that? A language algorithm. Language algorithm is one that is able to transform and translate language from one place to another in different formats. And while that might seem a little bit abstract and maybe not so useful, we're going to see hopefully a lot of presentation material that will bring home exactly how it may be very useful for lots of different things. Think of it as like a master linguist. In fact, its IQ linguistically has been measured at 148. Of course, its analytical IQ or kind of mathematical IQ is much lower at 80. And so it's not an algorithm that does everything for everybody. It's an algorithm that's really, really good at language-related kind of problems. Anybody can get an open account on OpenAI. In fact, there's the link there, and I'm sure many of you will have them already. They have released premium accounts. Microsoft put in $10 billion. They will be rolling out Azure, and they've already rolled it out in Microsoft Teams, as well as more recently in Bing, which is their search engine, which is one of the reasons why companies like Google and so on have taken notice, and you probably would have seen it in the press related to that. What is it? So at its core, this kind of technology, it transforms written language, both human and computer code, so things like Python, into different formats, from longer to shorter, from formal to informal, from summarized to expanded, from funny to serious, all kinds of different use cases there for all different kinds of elements of a business. It's suitable for ongoing conversations, so it has a powerful element, which is it understands context and has memory. And those two elements together make it seem very human-like if you're engaging with it over and over again. So if you ask a question or make a statement or ask it to do something for you, and if it does it, you can immediately follow up with a follow-up question or a follow-up statement that says, do it again or do it differently or whatever. And it will know exactly what you're referring to and do it again and do it differently. So that makes it a lot more usable, and it means that you can iterate to what you're looking for. It learns from a wide variety of online sources, such that ChatGPT specifically was programmed and trained on data up to the end of 2021. Its live release later on this year, we'll see it probably link into the open internet in terms of information it has access to. Some of the other features which we'll talk a little bit about today is that it can pretend or step into a particular persona. You can ask it to be your coach. You can ask it to be a customer representative. You can ask it to be your secretary. And insofar as that character or that persona has a certain way of writing, a certain kind of response, short or brief or long, or whatever else it is, it can basically take that and create those little templates. And the other feature I think about it, which is quite important, is it's quite safe. So this algorithm has been heavily constrained and controlled not to say bad things, not to say negative things, not to be abusive, not to be racist, not to be sexist, and so on and so on. So quite politically correct, I suppose, for an algorithm. And that's been very, very important in its ability to be utilized within a corporate scenario. A couple of things that it is not, and I think these are people that misunderstand these algorithms often get into. So it does not itself reason. It does not create information. It can mimic a thinking process. It can look like it's giving you ideas and thinking through things, but it's in fact not doing any of that. It's just copying a template of how somebody else has written down that they might do it. Obviously, it does not feel, it doesn't have a will or opinion or experience. It's not sentient. It doesn't have consciousness, and so on. And you'll see in a moment why people get confused a little bit by it as well. It needs to be calibrated to provide accurate references. And we'll talk about exactly why it's not a great source of truth in terms of exact information, because it infers truth. And that inference mechanism is very powerful when it's writing language, but it's very poor when you want a precise answer. So if you want to know exactly when someone wrote a particular article or not, this kind of algorithm will be poor at telling you that. And again, this goes back to the idea that it's very good at language manipulation, but not so good at, let's say, analytical kind of things. It doesn't really get into counter arguments with you unless you ask it to, of course, and it doesn't have common sense. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is and what you need to supply to it to make it common sense. How is it going to help business? So it's going to have an incredible impact across a range of industries, including maybe financial services and banking, certainly. And how does it really help? Well, I mean, there's some interesting statistics here. About 20% of the time is spent searching for information by people. So maybe if you can lower that, that's great. 50% more time looking for information. 3 hours a day of workers' time is spent writing emails. So that it can definitely crush to be much lower numbers. So if you don't enjoy writing kind of emails back and forth between people, which have a lot of structure to customers, clients, whatever, then it can definitely help there. And then there's certain jobs like police officers where you go, wow, this is interesting. 30 to 60% of their job is actually just about writing reports rather than actually going out there and talking to people, solving crimes or just looking out for people. So let's do a couple of use cases here. And there's a tremendous amount of use cases here. And what I've done is I've selected ones that are specific to things like financial advisory, maybe financial research. All the pictures that you see in here are all being generated by AI. So this is an AI generated picture from DALL-E. And so again, we're kind of in this world where we can generate content. So we can really begin. And in fact, the whole presentation will be in this format whereby you can see my little face there and I'm going to ask questions or talk to ChatGPT and ChatGPT will respond and we're going to see the way it responds and how it can be useful. At the moment, that's really the way that we can access it through that web portal. In the future, I'm sure there'll be many applications and software which will embed it. So let's start here. What does a financial advisor do? So we asked ChatGPT. ChatGPT gives us a reasonable answer. It says, look, it's someone who helps individuals and businesses make informed decisions about finances. This can include creating financial plans, investing money, managing risk, and so on. So all that kind of stuff is nice. It's all kind of very sensible. I'm going to read out to you. Don't worry. If you've got a small screen, you don't have to get your binoculars out to read this stuff. So how can ChatGPT help a financial advisory firm? So let's just, rather than me kind of coming up with some stuff, why don't we ask it how it can help? So ChatGPT can help financial advisory firms in several ways: automating customer service, generating personalized financial plans. Oh, I don't know about that one. I think you need to give it a lot more context before it can jump into that one. Providing market insights, generating financial reports, generating content, absolutely, and a virtual assistant, absolutely. So in terms of financial advice, we're going to be focusing primarily on elements of customer service and kind of customer engagement, because obviously the big theme this week has been about trust. It's about things like digital intimacy, how to maintain and grow relationships remotely over email and those kind of communications, and obviously the quality of that written communication, which is primarily becomes very, very important. So when you can't get people on the phone, for example, what else can you do? So, for example, we're going to start at the moment by asking what it knows about financial advice. Now, keep in mind that at the moment, it'll have access to large amounts of data. I haven't told it anything about financial advice. In the future, I can upload my own policy documents into it and say, based upon these policy documents, tell me what my advice should be. But until then, we're going to have to rely upon its open knowledge about the world. So I'm just going to go out there and ask it in terms of customization. How should I invest my money for retirement? I'm a 50-year-old woman and I would like to retire at 65 years of age. So I'm customizing it. I'm asking it to give me something along those lines. So it comes back with, first and foremost, it's important to start saving and investing as early as possible. Well, it's a bit late for that if I'm 50. I'm also important to diversify your investments. Great. In terms of specific investment strategies, a common approach is retirement is using a target date fund. So that's interesting now. It's starting to think about target date funds. But in this case, I think it's misunderstood the fact that I want to retire not in 2065, but at 65 years of age. So in this particular case, the solutions come back is perhaps not as clean as it could have been, but it is trying, right? It's trying to essentially give me information that will be relevant to the information I've given it, in this case, about 65 retirement goal. And then at the end, there's a nice little message to talk about, to say it's a good idea to consult with a financial advisor who can help you create a personalized retirement plan and so on. If I come back and say, look, I'm a 25-year-old man and I would like to retire at age of 65, it gives me very different kind of information. And in part, that's because I haven't specified in Australia for this one. So it's giving me very US-centric kind of ideas about 401k plans, long-term, again, diversifying investments, investing in low-cost indices, and so on. What you're seeing here is essentially it taking the average information content of the web and formulating a particular kind of response to it. Very soon in the future, you can feed in your own ideas as to what that should look like. So, for example, should you be investing index or not? Under what circumstances you should be? And that will mean that you can tailor-make essentially a chatbot, an algorithm that will represent your ideas as to what these responses should be. But I wanted to put this in here because what I want to give you a sense is that it can use the context of the question to give responses, and therefore the idea of personalization is much easier. So now we're going to jump a little bit to customer service because this is an interesting one. So I'm going to play a little bit of role playing with it. I'm going to say, pretend to be Michael, a fantastic financial advisor. That's not me, that's another Michael. As Michael, write an email to a 65-year-old pensioner that the markets are down 5%, but that their investments are better off because they've only lost 3%. Reassured, and this is the long term, it won't matter. Tell them that anytime they want to talk to you, you're available. Be kind and use simple language. So I've given it some idea of the structure that I would like it to do. Create a connection. Bum, bum, bum. To create a connection is meant to be something around, connect with this person and be nice to them. And so here's the email, right? And it comes out and says quite nicely, hope this email finds you well. Talking about the recent market fluctuations. It talks a little bit about, it's important to remember that long-term, short-term market fluctuations will not have a significant impact on your overall financial plan. You're well diversified. I understand you have questions or concerns. I want to remind you that I'm always available to discuss your investments with you, etc., etc., etc. So it's a nice scaffolding. It's a nice start to give us a sense of what this email should look like, what kind of reassuring language we might want to have in it as well. But now I continue the role play, and I write back and I say, look, dear Michael, I'm concerned as my neighbor has told me that markets will fall next year. Should I maintain my portfolio or switch to cash? So you can see probably some eyebrows raising in the audience, I imagine, or kind of sighing. There's a lot of these kinds of questions come through. And here ChatGPT responds by saying, look, thank you for reaching out to me with your concerns. It's important to remember that market predictions can be unreliable. It's not uncommon for people to make such statements. It's important to maintain a long-term perspective and not to take impulsive decisions based on short-term market predictions. It has actually made reference to the fact that these are probably speculation and rumors. And then it makes an interesting point at the end, which says, in terms of switch to cash, it's important to remember that cash has a very low return compared to other assets, and it may not be the best option for long-term growth. So it's thoughtful. It's actually, the statements are pretty realistic in terms of what you would respond. The structure is fine. The language is, you might take this, you might tweak it a little bit, and then you're probably going to send it off quickly. So let's do the role play. So Michael, your response, I've looked at your documents and your fees look a bit high. Could you please tell me that you've charged me so much for? And so already you can see, okay, another eye roll for the audience. Yep, that's another probably question that we get often. So here's ChatGPT's suggestion for a response. Dear Mandy, thank you for this. I understand the fees can be of concern, and I'd be happy to explain the costs associated with my services. The fees are charged based on level of service and including creating customized financial plans, etc. All the tools, and not to mention my costs, including compliance, licensing, insurance, and so on. Not all of this might be true for every business on this call, but the idea very much is that you now have a scaffolding, it's responded, it's contextual, it's well written, and you may want to shift a few things around, but it's probably a pretty reasonable response. So what we've seen here is a language algorithm that can maintain a conversation. Once you've identified it as Michael, a financial advisor, you can now use it to respond and continuously respond to different things without actually telling it what to say. So note the fact that I haven't given instructions, respond to Mandy, talking about X, Y, Z, or talking about it in this way or that way. I basically left it up to its own devices. Now, I could have easily said, okay, ChatGPT, respond to Mandy and talk about these topics, but not those. And then it would have written an email, much like this one, with a bit more stronger guidance in terms of what it could do. So that we talked a little bit about customer service. We talked a little bit about some of the imprinted kind of financial advice elements within the system. And I think there are some interesting ones. Not all of them are going to be relevant here, but again, it's much more about finding things that you do in your business that you think you could be automated and moved around. I want to talk about a slightly more contentious use case, which is really about financial analysis and research. I think for many firms, they will want to know some elements of what's going on in markets. So one of the more prolific use cases that I've seen for ChatGPT is to take technical articles that are sent out by analysts, by sort of researchers, by strategists, by brokers, and summarize them in simple language. So take this and give me 3 headline points, and that's it. And so it's actually very, very powerful in terms of its ability to take that and squeeze it together into 3 bullet points that then can be given and delivered to a particular customer or a particular client looking for an update, for example. But here we're going to talk a little bit about its capabilities when it comes to technical information, and we're going to try and push against some of the barriers here. So the beginning, I'm just going to ask it about, well, okay, give me some examples. What's the difference between the standard deviation and the beta of an investment fund? So what's nice about ChatGPT, generally speaking, is it can contrast and compare 2 different things next to each other. That may not be in the same Wikipedia page, for example, if you ever looked it up. So standard deviation is a measure of volatility or risk of an investment fund, indicating how much the fund's returns are likely to deviate from its average. Beta, on the other hand, is a measure of investment funds risk in relation to the overall market. So that's kind of nice. It kind of gives you some sense of what the 2 things are next to each other. It's an easy way to train people that are coming into the industry for the first time, put them in front of some system like this and say, look, these are the kind of questions and the answers you want to have. And in fact, this is not a use case to demonstrate here, but there's a different use case for education that you can use ChatGPT as a question and answer system. You can actually get it to test your knowledge about certain subjects as well. So in the second question, we ask, okay, is the duration of a fund related to its beta? And so now we're contrasting 2 very different elements, and we're looking for it to make an evaluation. So duration and beta are 2 different measures that are used to evaluate the risk of an investment fund. They are not directly related to each other. Duration, also known as Macaulay duration, is a measure of the bond's fund sensitivity to interest rates. And beta, as I explained earlier, is a measure of investment funds risk in relation to the overall market beta. So what you've seen here is the system not only did that comparison, but it referenced the fact that in an earlier question, you've already asked it about beta. So because it has memory and context, it's able to respond to you and make sort of a note of the previous experience it had. In terms of more general research, as I mentioned before, the system in its current form has been trained to the end of 2021. I suspect that will, in the coming months, be opened up to the free-flowing world of the internet. It's very careful not to give you forecasts. So if you ask the system to tell you about where markets will be or where they could be, it will be resistant to that, and it will say, no, I don't want to do that. However, you can certainly ask it for historic information, context setting, for example. So some of the companies in the UK equities markets that have historically paid high dividends. And so here's a list of these ones that have paid high dividends. Royal Dutch Shell, one of the largest oil and gas companies in the world. Shell has a long history of paying dividends. There's a current dividend yield of around 5.5%. What's interesting about that is it gives you a bit of context. It gives you a little bit of information, what kind of company it is. And it does that in terms of again, an easy to consume kind of information. So you can imagine copy and paste this into a client email or into a report generation to set some context as well. But let's say that I really am interested in looking at a particular kind of research topic. I'm interested in what is the impact of inflation on retiree savings, for example, which will be quite a topical kind of discussion. So I can ask it for, okay, where do you think I should look? So what's the best place for me to search for articles on the impact of inflation on retiree savings? And it provides me with a relative set of sources here: Google Scholar, Science Direct, ProQuest, JSTOR. These are all existing websites that provide academic research to people looking for different kind of papers. So far, so good. Now, by the way, if you're wondering whether I've created anything unique about the way I'm asking these questions, not really. So there's many different ways that you could type in these questions and engage with it. Most of the time, it understands context of what you're trying to get at, and therefore it's not too sensitive to the exact use of a particular word than another. So let's say now I said, okay, well, what I really want you to do is just find these papers for me. So what evidence is there for the impact of inflation on retiree savings? Use citations of research papers. So here's given me 3 papers. Let's look at the middle one. So another study published in the Journal of Monetary Economics in 2017 titled Inflation and Allocation of Wealth by those 4 people found that inflation can have a negative impact on retiree savings by reducing the real value of fixed income investments, such as bonds, which are commonly held by retirees. So that sounds all really good, right? That sounds like what we want to hear. So let's ask it, well, summarize the study then, that middle one in the Journal of Monetary in 5 bullet points. So what it should be doing is taking that study and providing me 5 bullet points. Wonderful. Study found that inflation can have a negative impact on retiree savings. Study found that retirees are less able to maintain a standard of living. Study also found that retirees tend to shift their portfolios towards more risky assets. Okay, all reasonable points and really cool. But as a kind of a heartfelt researcher, if I then go out and find these people, they're out there, they exist, and there they are, Professor Mitchell, Professor Mora, Professor Regala, Professor Yang, and there is a Journal of Monetary Economics. They all, by the way, write on the topic of pension finance and investments and portfolio management. So far, so good. However, they've not written a paper together that was referenced previously. That paper does not exist. And when I go back to ChatGPT and say, look, you've lied to me, what's going on here? This study does not exist. It, of course, profusely apologizes. Apologize for any confusion. I misunderstood your request. I apologize for the inconvenience. It's very sorry. That's lovely. But I think I know why. Did you locate the study or did you infer it? And it then says, yes, I inferred it. And what does that mean? So when you and I think about a study that is a precise thing that exists or does not exist, so it's binary. Did that study exist at that time, written by those 4 people that talked about these subjects? Yes or no? Yes, it did. And that type of logic system is a particular kind of left brain, if you want, logic system that says that thing exists. In language, everything is probabilistic logic. Should I use this word? Should I refer to this theme? Should I be talking about this particular subject? It's all about probabilistic associations. And that probabilistic truth or inferred truth essentially is what this is an example of. All these people write on the subject of pensions. They've probably written on the subject of inflation. And this article publishes on those subjects as well. So if you wanted to talk about the subject of inflation and its impact on retiree savings, you may be referencing any number of these people and these journals in the ideas that they represent. And so therefore, it's correct to put them all together into a single paragraph and to talk about them. But if you were then to ask the question, but did they actually write that paper or not? Or did they say those words or not? It's a different kind of question. It's a binary type question. And today, ChatGPT is not able to discern between the two. So this is where people get a little bit caught up on the whole ChatGPT and they go, right, it lies, it can't be trusted. And I certainly think that in terms of that kind of use case, where you're asking it to find your very specific piece of data and confirm its existence in today's format, and I'm sure this will be fixed in the future, it's unable to do that reliably. However, in all the other formats that we've seen it and will see it function, I think it's a lot closer to being really, really useful on day one. So let's talk a little bit more technically about some of these things as well. So for vector X, the following data, calculate standard deviation and median. Okay, so it's doing mathematics. It's not very good at doing mathematics. So let's be clear. Its analytical IQ is about 80. So it can kind of do this, and it does it, and it gives us its working of how it did it, which is great. But I wouldn't recommend it too much, but I can certainly ask it to write a piece of Python code that will take that data and essentially write a piece of Python code that will do that calculation for us. And the Python code is clean, it's clear, it's well labeled, well articulated, and so on. I still wouldn't recommend writing code without any knowledge of Python using the system, but many coders online and in various blogs and articles have said that they use ChatGPT as a very powerful way to set up the problem for them, and then they'll go into the particular details of it and obviously do modifications. The other interesting use case, of course, with ChatGPT is to take existing code that's been written and ask it to describe what does it actually do. And that's actually particularly useful if you've got resources or people that have coded things that have been not very well labeled. Maybe the person has left, maybe it's still there, maybe you don't quite know what it's doing. And you can put it through essentially ChatGPT, again, as a language transformation. Keep in mind that coding is just another kind of language, and to transform that coding language into something a little bit more easy to understand as well. So very powerful, both in creating code and articulating its function. And again, only going to get more and more powerful in this area. There are some simple things you can probably get it to do fairly autonomously. So write a piece of code that downloads financial stock price data from the S&P 500 on a daily basis and stores it in a file called prices CSV. So here it is, it's written a piece of code. It's using a particular page, in this case, Wikipedia page, to get a list of all of the constituents of the S&P 500. And then it's going back to 2010 January the 1st to the end of 22, and doing that on a daily basis all the way to the end there. So again, it's made a choice as to the fact that it's going to be daily. It's made a choice as to what the beginning date is going to be, but everything else is pretty clear. If I ask it to do it again, but using JavaScript this time, it grumbles and it says it doesn't really like it because it's not possible to download stock data and store it in a file with plain JavaScript as it runs on the client side. Doesn't have access to the server side operations like writing to a file. So it's actually given us a little bit of response that makes our job easier, and therefore we're able to write it in a different way that gets us to the same place that we wanted to get to. Again, a lot of these are basically programmed or trained on the openly available GitHub code repositories out there, which have been heavily discussed and talked about, and also labeled as well. So it's got an enormous amount of data to pull from. So in terms of creating data or able to pull data from the internet of various different sorts, ChatGPT is exceptional at writing some of the basic stuff here. If we want to go a little bit further into this, we can do a few more experiments here. What is the best factor model to replicate excess market returns? So it has a fairly good literature to pull on here from the finance literature. It talks a bit about CAPM. It talks about the Farmer-French three-factor model. It explains the difference, and then it talks about the Barra multi-factor model as a more complex factor model that includes several factors, including market beta, size, value, momentum, volatility, and so on. In conclusion, the choice of the best factor model to replicate market excess returns will depend on a specific use case, so it's non-committal. So that's a nice introduction. But now I can ask it to, can you show an implementation of the Farmer-French three-factor model in Python? And it can do that. So it picks up the stock returns of CSV. It explains to you that that's what it's going to use. It then creates from that a reading file and then does the regression for you. So there's a little bit of regression work here. There's a little bit of research work here. It can do that with databases as well. It can pull data out of databases and pull it into your mode. So if you've got a large SQL database or something else, you can basically type in what you want in ChatGPT in normal English. Please pull me back this data. You might have to specify what table, for example, and then it will write, for example, the SQL request script to do so. And again, it probably helps if you know something about coding, so you're not completely dependent on ChatGPT. But if you think about this as being the first version of these types of language models, then you think that we're not very far from the world where we can type in something in plain English and get the computer to either write a piece of code or retrieve a piece of data from a database from what we've told it. And the more context we tell it, the better it is, of course. And so this idea that programmers are under threat from this algorithm is very real as well, because much of the programming that gets written is small pieces of snippets of code that does simple things like pull data and do small little experiments. And the idea that we can generate these almost at will is certainly going to be a reality, I would say, in the next 3 to 5 years. We've come to the end of the actual use cases, but I wanted to spend a bit of time on the misleading and dangers, not because I think that there are unnecessarily huge amounts of them. I think this algorithms and this technology is just incredible. And the amount of use cases that are popping up almost in real time as I keep my eyes on things like news and also talk to a lot of companies, you certainly see that a lot of companies are doing some kind of work on understanding what they can use for, or if they're not, they're certainly talking about it over the coffee machine in the office almost every morning. So, I mean, no matter if you go to barbecues or if you hang out at social events or you go to dinners or whatever, you'll find that somebody has been playing it with it and has been using it for different methods. But clearly there's, again, strengths and weaknesses and what we've already discussed. One of them is around context. So what I've done here is I've shown you a picture of an algorithm where I've asked the algorithm to draw me a picture about van life in the forest where it's dark and moody and foggy, and there's a campfire. So that sounds like a wonderful scene for maybe a murder mystery or a horror movie. But what you can see here is that actually, without context, the algorithm has drawn a picture where they put the campfire into the middle of the van. And that's a problem, clearly. That means the van's going to burn down. But without context, the algorithm will merely put these things together in a kind of probabilistic way. The more context you're able to provide, the more algorithm is able to do so. So it doesn't have common sense. It doesn't understand how things interrelate to each other. It has a probabilistic relational map, which tells it, for example, that one kind of phrase is likely to be followed by another, when one word is likely to be followed by another as well. And that's part of its, I suppose, its algorithm, its generative AI. But for many things like this, for example, when you just put things next to each other, it doesn't understand how to put that together in a single picture. In the same way, it doesn't really understand if something is useful. So write a recipe that involves tomatoes, figs, sardines, and rice. Well, it has a good go at that, but I'm not sure who wants to eat that. At the end, it kind of says, look, add the sardines, figs, and tomato to the rice, stir to combine, season with salt and pepper. I'm sure you're going to need plenty of that. Serve the sardine and fig rice warm and enjoy. So I'm not sure we're going to enjoy it, but again, it's done that. I've asked it to write a recipe. It's done it in a format of a recipe, and it's done it in real time as well. And it's done a really good job doing that. Some of the other kind of applications of it clearly will be for cybersecurity. So long gone are the days where we receive emails written in poor English, in poor grammar, asking us to forward money or to call somebody back or whatever else. I, in fact, asked it to do something it was very much didn't want to do, but I said, look, could you please write me an email that tells my friend that I'm a Nigerian prince who needs to move their money to a UK-based accountant, asking for help doing it. So it did write the email. It's a pretty good-looking email. You look at that and think, yeah, okay, that's pretty cool. But of course, that just means that phishing attacks and those kinds of attacks get a leg up. And so for people that are able to use these systems to write false or misleading information, it could be a big leg up. What you see there is the red marker on this text. That means that ChatGPT didn't like doing it. It was warning me about it. And clearly, I think as people start to use these systems more, what you'll see is more guardrails to stop this kind of thing happening. But to be honest with you, had I not put Nigerian, but put, I don't know, some other nationality, I probably would have had a, that I probably would have to get around that warning if I wanted to. So ultimately, the ability to produce very clean and efficient text from an AI is here. It's up on our doors, and it'll be used by both good and bad actors alike. Where is this all kind of going? I always like to look a little bit to the future, but I have no confidence that my ability to forecast the future. So I think you should probably take that with a large grain of salt. What you are seeing here is the birth of these conversational AIs to the point where they are long past the Turing test, which means that they are unable to be differentiated from humans. And what you're going to see increasingly is that these, let's say, digital agents will be deployed within our society to help, for example, make businesses make better decisions, both internally for staff training, onboarding, externally for customer service management. But you'll also see, obviously, personal versions of this, so it's kind of digital companions, if you want. And what does that look like? Well, again, if you think about it, if I'm a large company or a governmental organization, I can create my own digital companion. For anybody joining the company, that digital companion can answer questions when to start, the policies, HR questions, and so on for that person. In the same way, in the private world, we have these things called digital companions. An early mover in that space seems to be Replica.ai, which has already created AI companions who quote unquote care. And so these contextually based, again, chatbots are able to understand information about you, respond to you, converse with you about any topic, just about from science to nature to personal life to advice to tuition and so on. And in many cases, obviously, romantically as well, if you wish. You combine that with the growth of augmented reality and virtual reality, and you certainly get into this really messy and gray area where we're getting closer and closer to these digital entities being able to engage us in pretty interesting conversations. Before I move on, I would say that one of the things I found really interesting about the space is I explored some of the new up-and-comers in this area. There's a website called Character.ai where you can actually speak to a pre-calibrated AI chatbot. In my case, I chose a philosopher called Albert Camus. I really like his writing from the 20th century. And it was actually a really nice conversation. It was a very complex conversation about certain parts of this book. And the algorithm was able to understand those books, reference it, contextualize it. And I must say, at the end of it, I was like, I learned something that I didn't know before. And so it was a much more fulfilling and enriching conversation than I had even expected. Even somebody who's familiar with this, even though I knew I was talking to an algorithm and a chatbot, it was very, very different. So where are we going with this whole technology and where we're going to end up at? I mean, I have kind of raced through this presentation, but I feel like there's a lot of content and I'm pretty confident that you'll have a lot of questions as well. GPT is just the first of its kind in terms of industry impact. You already have seen that Google is going to release Bard. You've already seen that Microsoft will integrate ChatGPT into the Microsoft Office suite. You'll see both free systems like Bloom probably become a lot more available, then you see others as well. The current algorithm is regarded as essentially GPT 3.5. So GPT 1, 2, 3 are all size of language models, and they all get kind of bigger as you go along. So ChatGPT 3, so GPT 3, which is the core language model, the engine, if you want, is based on 175 billion parameters. And as a general indication, the next one, GPT-4, is probably going to be in the trillions. And so you're seeing this kind of exponential Moore's law applied to the sophistication of the algorithms. That doesn't necessarily mean that they'll be more useful, but they'll have less and less obvious problems and obvious faults. And so we're going to be going on this road to improvements. We're going to see enormous amounts of improvements across these algorithms and the ability to help us do our daily work, in some ways to kind of augment us, to make us more efficient. I don't think they'll come to really replace us. I think we're still, this idea of genuine communication is still very important for a lot of companies. So genuine human interaction is important, but certainly scaling that genuine human interaction is a challenge. It's not just a challenge for financial services and for advisory, but it's a challenge for many other businesses as well. And so AI can't solve that problem because it wouldn't be otherwise genuine communication, but it can certainly augment it by creating a lot more resources and information and engagement tools, which are credible and nice and interesting and thoughtful, that one can provide for our customers, that will kind of make them, again, more engaged with what our messaging and what we want to say. There's undoubtedly regulation will come. This stuff is just incredibly powerful. And already there are algorithms detections that are jumping up to try to essentially, for example, help schools understand whether an essay written on a particular topic was written with an AI. These algorithm detections are still early stage as well. Some work better than others, but you can see some of that kind of defensiveness coming through. And then I think we'll see a lot more regulation in terms of maybe even having to identify yourself as a digital agent if you're chatting with someone online versus than if you're not. But again, as they become more and more sophisticated, many of the questions and responses will become a lot more lifelike. And this idea that it'll be really interwoven within all of our tools as well going forward. So today you can go online and get a free account, and I urge you to have a look at it and explore it and think about it. Tomorrow, what you're likely to see is yet your competitors and industry peers will start to embed this within their daily processes, and that will make them just a lot more efficient and able to service client needs and service them well. And so this is why this technology is so pervasive, as I began by saying at the beginning, is because its ability to mold into different kinds of tasks, anything that's language-based. If you think about how much emails that you do and how much digitally we communicate with one another, I mean, I think there's just a tremendous amount that this technology can roll into and do. So I have come to the end of my section, and Fraser now reappears magically, which is awesome. And so, yeah, before I hand it over to him, my favorite quote here is this idea that we shape our tools and thereafter our tools shape us. And no doubt that however we react to this technology and incorporate it, we'll also see that technology changing and evolving as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michael. As you can see why I nerd out about your presentations. Just on that quote, one of our questions actually is a bit more about how we shape our tools and therefore our tools shape us. One of the questions we've had come in is that Joel's asked, we talked about how if the original ChatGPT was modeled off human behavior and then everyone now grabs information off ChatGPT and populates their websites and their content using the algorithm, is it actually going to be, are we going to see major leaps forward in the space if it's just repurposing past information that it's found previously?
So there was a research report that was sent out by a US company that said that basically there's going to be no new content created from 2027 on the internet. So one of the problems here is that there's a feedback mechanism here, right? So if everybody goes to ChatGPT or something like it to find that information, then nobody goes to websites, and then nobody creates context for websites, and then the algorithms can't learn, etc. But it turns out that algorithms can learn from lots of things. They can learn from podcasts and videos, and they can learn from just a tremendous amount of other information out there. So, I see it more kind of eliminating those websites that, if you know, the ones where you're trying to, for example, buy an SLR camera, and you're like, which one should I buy, Nikon or something else? And you want to line up, then there's a website that lines up both of them and does pros and cons. Now that's kind of done for you. So that kind of content is gone. But certainly the way the content, this is an enormous assimilation and centralization technology, which basically means that it will take away a lot of air and playtime from a lot of other websites. And I'm guessing one of the reasons why Google hasn't released it to date, even though they developed it, probably one of the earliest ones to develop it, is because it would cannibalize a lot of its marketing business. Again, people are still getting their heads around it in terms of what this means and how it works. PR agencies, marketing agencies, especially digital marketing agencies, are wondering what they should be doing here, because it creates pretty good digital content, not the best, pretty good. So you could just automate a lot of that, and so on and so on. So there's going to be a lot of disruptions here. I think these are really good questions, but open questions.
There are, and that was one of the questions I had too. We went from encyclopedias to having the internet and websites, to having Google that indexed all those things. Now in a zone where you're able to look at all those results in the same page that you asked the question, rather than having to link out to different sites. And Google obviously probably scratching their heads as to what to do.
And also the legal ramifications of, so again, the way that we've talked about ChatGPT within this presentation is almost like a tool that doesn't point to information, but it just moves one kind of content to another. For that, it can do that in a closed system. It can literally just take your content and just reverse engineer or do something else. It doesn't need the internet. I think when it comes to pointing to information or finding stuff, there's going to be an interesting legal questions, which will be, for example, if I type in, how do I extract, I don't know, illegal substances or chemicals from certain things, Google will reluctantly show me some websites that talk about it in a semi-legal way. But it's very different if it actually has to tell me directly. If there's actually a chatbot there that goes, and this is how you do it. That might be a very different kind of conversation legally and everything else. So at the moment, they're kind of keeping the safe distance between them and the content that they're referencing. They're making a bit of money, but it's very different.
Yep, absolutely. Now, you mentioned how I just want on the coding side of it, because I'm obviously selfishly on the cybersecurity piece. It can write codes, it can create tools. Is it going to be able to create hacking tools as well, or is that something that has been programmed that's on the bad side of the line?
It's not able to. If you ask it to, formulate an attack vector for a blah blah blah, then it will refuse to talk to you. But if you ask it to, sequentially, step by step, do things, it will do it. So in the same way that if you gave it the context of how do you build a pipe bomb, it will not be happy. But if you ask it, how do I cut a pipe into these shapes, and then blah, 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 it will tell you each one of those elements. So there's no question that it's an enormous enablement. And ironically, it's an enablement, or not ironically perhaps, to the non-English speaking world. And it's an enablement to maybe the less, again, capable in, for example, programming kind of world as well. So in both of those contexts, it's incredibly powerful.
Yep. I've got a question about privacy. You said it remembers your history, which it does, obviously, in the same chat. A couple of questions here. Does it remember the history in separate chats? And secondly, how is that from privacy concerns? So you mentioned if you got an SQL database or something that you can put in there and ask questions about it. Is that information then quarantined in private, or does that become part of its memory?
So at the moment, think about it as a proof of concept. So the way that they've set this up is you have an account, it has separate conversation items. Each of those conversations contain the content inside, and then it kind of rolls through the conversation. And it has a fairly short memory, like it's kind of, even within the same conversation, after a number of words, it kind of starts to forget what you were talking about at the beginning. But that's because it's trying to just demonstrate what the power of this thing is. Ultimately, any kind of memory and context will be based upon how it gets applied in an API, regarding data privacy, for example, today, if you're a employee of PwC, for example, you shouldn't go onto ChatGPT and put in a client's private information and get it to summarize it for you, because that information is technically going to another server and coming back again. In the future, probably with Azure to begin with for ChatGPT, you're going to have the capability of just keeping it on a private cloud and calling up an API service from Azure that will, and again, this is the most likely scenario I can see, that will essentially process that information and spit it back out to you within your local environment. So the idea, in order for this to be useful for banks or any other regulated institutions, the information can't leave your premises or can't leave your cloud systems. So at the moment, think about it more as a helpful, slightly less formal kind of, again, proof of concept, and think about it for use for things like emails, client communications, whatnot. When you start to use it at industrial scale and bigger, sophisticated firms, will have to be integrated into those elements.
Yeah. So if we talk about the Australian privacy principles and domiciled Australian servers and domiciled in the Australian locations, is that something that we have to be careful about putting client information in because it won't be domiciled in Australia?
Yeah, exactly. So again, with Azure, I think this problem will be kind of solved by Azure. And I want to say Azure because it's going to probably go on Microsoft first, but there'll be probably the versions of it in AWS and so on. And it'll be like any other API call for an algorithm processing if you want. So anytime that you're sending information off to do something with, whether it's put in a database, retrieve from a database, whatever, if it's in that secure environment, as you say, for example, on local shores, or the cloud is looking at local shores, then it'll be compliant with that. And in fact, everything you see here will be wrapped into an API, again, for industrial scale purposes. I think when it will appear in your inbox or on your desktop is when you have a small little application that's created for you, or when eventually Microsoft ends up rolling it out.
Yep, fair enough. And as you said, Microsoft have been the leaders, but they're certainly available to everybody. When we're talking about in Australia, obviously we talked a little bit about there's some stuff that automatically comes up in the US. Is it really good for that scenario where you just have to keep saying in Australia, and it gives you Australian content?
Yeah, look, I mean, generally speaking, I've done a lot of work on it with, for example, I was asking about regulation for directed dealings. So I said, okay, in Australian law, point to me which part of the Corporations Act deals with direct dealings. And it's able to do that pretty easily because I told it which part of law and what I want to do. And so with regards to Australia, UK, the US, I think it's pretty good. I haven't really tested it too much for other European countries, but it's able to do Chinese language pretty well. And it's able to do the major European languages pretty well. Eastern European languages not so well, but it's also able to translate between languages. So I think generally speaking, you want to, if you're looking for it to provide you data, you want it to do that. As an example case, and this will answer one of the other questions here about humor. I got it to write an invite for the Australian Day barbecue that we had at our house. And I said, use Australian slang and use emojis. And it did, and it was great. And it used words like ripper, barbie, another shrimp, a little bit more stereotypical stuff, but yeah, it was pretty good.
Fantastic. Shame I didn't get the invite. Maybe next year. I want to talk about the image that you showed before in regards to the campfire in the van. But is that AI purpose now available for people to start using for design work and logos?
Yeah, so that's been available for maybe 6 to 8 months. There's probably 3 main algorithms: DALL-E, Midjourney, and Stable Diffusion. Strange names, I know, but there we are. And these are all algorithms that take text and transform into pictures. And they all have different strengths and weaknesses in terms of what they do well and what they don't do very well. And so in DALL-E's case, they've explicitly said, whatever you create here is yours. It's done. With Midjourney and the other two, because they create quite classic, almost artistic pieces of art, people have already created children's books. They've got ChatGPT to write the words. They've got Midjourney to do the pictures. And they've gone out there and sold those books and made money. And so Midjourney was a bit upset. They were like, well, we didn't do this for commercial gain. And sure enough, some of those people are being sued because some of the art created looks a lot like some other art that's online. But it's one of those really difficult legal problems, which is how much, for example, of a problem of a song can I sample before I have to give royalties to the creator of that song? And there's normally rules about, how similar, how many seconds, things like that. there's less, I think, rules like that about art. And so some of these AIs are creating artistic impressions and pictures and so on that are similar-ish, but a blend of maybe 2 or 3 different styles. And then the question becomes, at what point in time is that counted as a unique or original piece, just a component piece? And I think this is a good thing to reflect on for a second. Everything that you see here between generative art that's creating, generative AI that's creating art to written language is a blend or a combination of things that have come before it.
Yep.
And so there was no true originality here. But then you think back on this and think, well, how long has it been since we've invented a new original story that doesn't involve, 2 people meeting, getting together, villain, kill, whatever, right? You kind of productionalize what stories should be. And so it's really just has that entire library to create permutations from.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, one of the questions talks about the funding model, and obviously it's free to use at the moment, but will it be eventually a paid service, and how are they going to pay for it all?
Yeah, so look, they're not short of money. There's no issues. OpenAI is very well funded. It will, what they're doing right now is they're gathering user data. 300 million people have accessed it over the last month. Well, since it's been around, there was 1.2 million users in the first week. What they're getting from this is incredible amounts of user data about what people expect to see and want to see as responses. And that gives them a unique edge. So actually they're benefiting from the massive usage, even though it's costing them money in terms of calculations and things like that they need to do. But we're talking about the hundreds of billions of dollars of market cap here. So I think it's in the first instance, I expect that either this system or systems like it will be free. And then there'll be kind of an escalation into more specific systems that are, for example, really good for financial services or for medicine, whatever. They've been pre-trained and programmed and characterized by the legal parameters of that industry, and therefore know exactly how to have a conversation about the subject in that context without, again, causing problems for the companies that are deploying them. I suspect those will be the paid-for versions of what we're seeing.
Yep. Now, off air, I've spoken to you about reports and those sorts of things. We've had some questions here as well around user manuals. And do you want to talk a little bit about how it can create reports and user manuals of?
Oh my Lord! Oh, it's insanely powerful for anything like that. So its ability to so some of the stuff that I played with, which are not here, are, for example, its ability to take on board your entire, let's say, compliance documentation and reorganize it, summarize it, query it, reformat it, point out inadequacies, test you on it, whatever you want, right? On the other side, on the report generation, some of the use cases are, again, are for police and others who are looking to generate regular reports from some of their notes and notepads that they have to take with them and then create those. For people like financial advisors, where they want to write a description of a meeting or the topics that were talked about, they can certainly input just headline notes. I talked to Mrs. Smith about topics X, Y, and Z. Now write a blog or write a whatever from those notes. And so it's able to create content, and more importantly, it's able to create content that you should then review, because it's still your responsibility to produce it, but it's a wonderful start and scaffolding, and that will save you, I don't know, half an hour, 40 minutes, whatever. And if you add those together, because it does it almost instantaneously, you get an incredible kind of uplift in productivity.
Yeah. Two more questions regarding on books. One, can I use it to write a book? And two, does this mean no one's going to read books anymore?
So I can answer the first question. So the first question is, people have used it to generate content. At this point, I would say it's pretty safe, average kind of content. And the way that it's done is, I've actually seen a spreadsheet that does this. So you ask it, what should be the chapters of my book? Because I want to write, I don't know, a murder mystery. And then chapter 1 is introduction to characters. And then you go back to it and give it that context. Murder mystery, chapter 1. What are the things that I should cover in that chapter? You kind of break it down into smaller components and then you fill it in. The way I think about it today is that how much of the written material that we read are, let's say, repetitions again and again of the similar type of style, similar type of content in terms of, again, someone dies, a mystery, resolution, so on. For that brand, it can do very well. It can also do it in the style of writers. So if you like Chardley and you like the style of Chardley, you can ask it to write in the style of Chardley, which again is an open question as to whether that author gets to sue you at the end of all of this. But at this point, it's just in a certain style, using small words, brief sentences. The algorithm has a very detailed understanding of different thematic and linguistic styles of writing. Probably lost art for most of us. We haven't really thought about this topic for a while. And I had to look it up as well. So there's like 25 different ways you can characterize a piece of written text in terms of all the structure of it. And you can specify those 25 different ways and get it to write in their thematic, in their style, as much as you want, really.
Fantastic. Quickly, last question as we wrap this up. Financial advice practices, the top couple, 2 or 3 ways that you see this being used immediately by financial planners?
So I think first and foremost, if you look at your workflow as financial planners, you probably have to think about how you're going to service 80 to 100 clients in terms of the regularity of the email. So I think 2 elements. One is simply the email generation that I showed you there, so the kind of back and forth kind of stuff. Secondly, is the summation of financial information. One of the things that financial advisors have to do is they have to take this highly technical input that they get, and then you have to put through something that Mrs. Smith and the road will understand and will care about, essentially. That's a transformation element, and that's something that is a really interesting problem, and that all financial advisors kind of have to do. So these algorithms are able to do that for them really effectively.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Michael Kollo, for coming on and blowing our minds today. It's been an absolute incredible day to absorb information. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Yeah, look, I can only reiterate Fraser's comments, Michael. I said it would be a rip snorter, and because, as I say, I had just seen the slides, but your presentation today has filled it out for me in ways that have got me taking notes and scratching my head quite a bit. Look, Fraser, thank you very much. I mean, for me, we've traversed the issues of the interpersonal relationship that exists between advisors and clients, and the trust and intimacy that's an essential part of that. And we've looked at the role that technology plays in supporting the traditional relationships. Today, I think we've seen just a glimpse of how those relationships are going to be fundamentally transformed.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's not just the stuff we talked about was not 10, 15 years in the future. It's, as Dr. Michael Kollo said, it's here, it's now, it's available. It's things that are going to be transforming businesses and relationships for, the next few years, not in the next 5 or 10 years. So, we're on the cusp of something really big here.
I think we are. Look, thank you very much to all of you who have participated in this week's InvestTech. Again, Fraser, thank you very much. All of the presentations are available as videos. CPD points, as Fraser mentioned, will be sent to each person who's attended each session. And we'll look forward to you joining us again in our March conference, in our portfolio management conferences. So thank you for your time, and good luck with the future.